You stand in the shadows of a royal chamber, watching as trembling hands lift a cloth toward a face that has not been truly seen in decades. The air is thick with the scent of dying flowers and something else, something sweet and rotting beneath the perfume. As the cloth touches skin, the white surface begins to wrinkle, not like porcelain, but like dried mud. Beneath it, flesh the color of ash. The woman on the bed does not flinch. She cannot. The mask she has worn every day for 40 years has finally fused with what remains of her face. In the corner, a lady-in-waiting turns away, her hand covering her mouth, fighting the urge to retch. This is not how legends are supposed to end. But Elizabeth Tudor was never just a legend. She was a woman who waged war against her own body, transforming hygiene into a weapon of state, and in the process, poisoning herself into immortality. Before we descend into this gilded horror, drop a comment and let me know where in the world you're watching from. It absolutely fascinates me that a queen's secrets from 4 centuries ago can reach you right now, wherever you are. The year is 1603. England has been ruled for 45 years by a woman who was never supposed to reign at all. Elizabeth Lassithers, daughter of the infamous Anne Boleyn, survivor of court intrigue, imprisonment, and assassination plots, has transformed herself from a bastard princess into Gloriana, the virgin queen whose face appears on coins, in portraits, in the collective imagination of an empire. But there is a vast distance between the Elizabeth the world sees and the Elizabeth who exists beneath the paint, the perfume, and the political performance. Her hygiene practices, which modern minds might dismiss as merely the ignorance of an unenlightened age, were in fact carefully calculated choices in a deadly game of perception. To understand the horror of what she did to herself, you must first understand what it meant to be a queen, in a world that believed women were, by nature, too weak to rule. Every decision about her body was a political act. Every layer of cosmetics was a declaration of power, and every refusal to wash was a refusal to be vulnerable. This is not a story about a woman who simply neglected cleanliness. This is a story about what happens when the line between person and symbol disappears entirely, when the body becomes a battlefield, and the casualty is the woman herself. The first habit that would define Elizabeth's reign and destroy her health began with something deceptively innocent: sugar. In the 1550s, when Elizabeth ascended to the throne, sugar was not a pantry staple. It was geopolitical currency, more valuable than salt, extracted from Caribbean plantations and traded like gold. To consume it openly, lavishly, was to announce to the world that England had arrived as a global power. Elizabeth did not merely enjoy sweets. She devoured them with a fervor that shocked even her own court. Meals ended with elaborate sugar sculptures. Castles, ships, mythological creatures, all edible, all consumed. She carried candied ginger in her pockets. She drank wine sweetened with honey and sucked on sugar lozenges throughout the day. Foreign ambassadors noted this obsession with a mixture of admiration and unease. The Venetian envoy wrote in 1598 that Her Majesty doth greatly delight in sweetmeats, to the ruin of her teeth, which are very black. But here is the cruelest irony. Elizabeth attempted to care for those teeth using a Tudor dental remedy that was itself made primarily of sugar, mixed with crushed herbs and sometimes honey. She was, quite literally, trying to clean the rot with the substance that caused it. By her 40s, her smile, once a tool of flirtation and diplomacy, had become a source of whispered horror. Her teeth turned black, then brown, then began to crumble. Several fell out entirely, creating gaps that made her speech slur and whistle. Her breath, according to multiple accounts, was so foul that courtiers would position themselves upwind during audiences. The pain must have been excruciating, yet she refused extraction for years, terrified of the agony. Then came one of the strangest acts of loyalty in English history. The Bishop of London, a man named John Aylmer, reportedly had one of his own healthy teeth pulled in front of the Queen to prove the procedure was bearable. Whether this actually convinced her or simply shamed her into action is unclear, but she eventually allowed a few removals. The rest she kept, rotting in her skull, a testament to her fear of pain and her refusal to show weakness. And here is where the story turns from tragedy to grotesque absurdity. The noblewomen of her court, desperate to emulate their queen in every way, began blackening their own teeth with soot and charcoal. A decayed smile became a status symbol. If you had black teeth, it meant you were wealthy enough to afford the sugar that ruined them. Elizabeth had turned her own physical decay into a fashion statement, a mark of elite consumption. Her body, even in its ruin, dictated culture. The second habit that shaped Elizabeth's life was her relationship with water, or rather, her avoidance of it. The famous line often attributed to her, "I bathe once a month, whether I need it or not," is likely apocryphal, but it captures a fundamental truth about Tudor hygiene. Water was not trusted. It was believed that immersing the body in water opened the pores, allowing disease-carrying miasmas to infiltrate the blood. Bathing was not seen as cleansing, it was seen as dangerous. So, how did Elizabeth stay clean? She didn't, not by modern standards. Instead, she practiced what was called dry cleaning. Several times a day, her ladies would help her change her linen undergarments, called shifts. These shifts were believed to absorb sweat, oils, and toxins from the skin. The act of changing into fresh white linen was, in Tudor logic, equivalent to bathing. The dirtier the discarded linen, the cleaner the body beneath. When she did wish to freshen up, servants would gently dab her skin with cloths soaked in rose water, lavender water, or scented vinegar. This was not a scrubbing. It was a ritual of anointing. Her body was not washed so much as perfumed, layered with fragrance to mask the reality beneath. A full bath was an ordeal. It required a massive wooden tub to be hauled into her chambers, dozens of buckets of water to be heated over fires and carried up flights of stairs, and hours of preparation. It happened perhaps once a month, perhaps less, and even then it was not a private act. Servants attended her, adding oils and petals to the water, ensuring the queen was never truly alone, even in her most vulnerable state. Yet, to anyone who saw her in public, Elizabeth appeared immaculate. Her gowns were always pristine, her hands pale and soft, her scent sweet and floral. She controlled the narrative of her cleanliness through appearance, not reality. She understood that power was not about truth, it was about what people believed to be true. And they believed she was the cleanest, most refined woman in England, because she looked and smelled that way. The sweat, the grime, the human reality of her body, all of that was hidden beneath layers of silk, linen, and illusion. The third and most infamous habit was the daily construction of her face. Every morning, Elizabeth did not simply apply makeup. She built a mask. This was not vanity. This was survival. In 1562, at the age of 29, Elizabeth contracted smallpox and nearly died. When she recovered, her face was scarred, pitted and discolored by the disease. For a queen whose legitimacy was constantly questioned, whose authority rested on projecting strength and divine favor, these scars were intolerable. So she erased them. Her weapon was a cosmetic called Venetian ceruse, a paste made from white lead and vinegar. When applied, it created a flawless porcelain-white complexion, smooth and ageless. It also contained one of the most toxic substances known to humanity. Lead is a slow poison. It seeps into the skin, accumulates in the bones, and damages the nervous system. Prolonged exposure causes hair loss, cognitive decline, seizures, and eventually death. Elizabeth applied it every single day for over 40 years. As her real face deteriorated beneath the paint, scarred by smallpox, ravaged by lead poisoning, she simply applied more. The layers grew thicker. By her 60s, courtiers whispered that her makeup was so thick it would crack if she smiled too broadly. She had become a living statue, her face frozen in the image of youth, even as her body aged and failed beneath it. For color, she used a bright red pigment made from cinnabar, mercuric sulfide. Mercury, like lead, is devastatingly toxic. It causes tremors, memory loss, irritability, and depression. In her later years, Elizabeth exhibited all of these symptoms. She became paranoid, prone to sudden rages, and increasingly withdrawn. She banned mirrors from her private rooms, refusing to confront the reality of her appearance. She could not bear to see what she had become. Her face no longer belonged to her. It belonged to England. It was a political instrument, carefully controlled and endlessly reproduced in official portraits. She ordered that all painters use a standard face pattern, copied from earlier, younger images of her. No matter how old she became, her painted likeness remained eternally youthful, eternally perfect. The real Elizabeth, the woman of flesh and blood, was erased, replaced by an icon. The fourth habit was her obsession with scent, not as a pleasure, but as a defense. Elizabeth lived in a world that reeked. London's streets ran with sewage. The Thames was an open sewer. Inside the palaces, chamber pots overflowed, and the smell of unwashed bodies mingled with rotting food and damp stone. To be royal was not to escape this stench, but to drown it out. Elizabeth carried pomanders, small, ornate metal balls filled with ambergris, musk, cloves, and cinnamon. She wore perfumed gloves soaked in oils. She kept bowls of rose petals in every room. Her clothing was stored with lavender and dried herbs. She did not wash away the smell of her body. She buried it beneath sweeter, stronger smells. Her hair, too, was rarely washed. Instead, it was stiffened with a mixture of egg whites and sugar water, sculpted into elaborate shapes, and then covered with wigs. As she aged and her hair thinned, likely due to lead and mercury poisoning, she amassed a collection of over 80 wigs, each one red or auburn, maintaining the illusion of her iconic coloring. Beneath those wigs, her scalp was bald and scarred, but no one saw it. No one was allowed to see it. The Elizabeth the world knew was a construct, assembled each morning by a team of women who painted, perfumed, and dressed a body that was slowly dying beneath their hands. The fifth and final habit was perhaps the most revealing: the environment she chose to live in. Elizabeth's palaces, Whitehall, Hampton Court, Greenwich, were architectural marvels, filled with tapestries, gold leaf, and stained glass. They were also cesspits. There was no plumbing, no running water. Waste was collected in chamber pots and either dumped into the Thames or into underground pits beneath the palace floors. The smell was inescapable. The Queen's own toilet was a velvet-covered chair called a close stool, with a removable ceramic pot beneath. Emptying this pot was the responsibility of the groom of the stool, one of the most powerful positions in the court. To be trusted with the Queen's waste was to be trusted with her secrets. It was a position of intimacy and influence, coveted by noblemen. But the rest of the palace was chaos. Floors were covered with rushes, dried reeds, and herbs meant to absorb moisture and mask smells. These rushes were rarely changed, becoming a festering mat of food scraps, spilled wine, and animal droppings. Beneath the grandeur was rot, and Elizabeth, the queen who painted her face white to appear divine, lived in this rot. She had no choice. Every few months the court would pack up and move to another palace, not for political reasons, but to escape the unbearable stench of their own accumulated filth. The palaces were left to air out, to be cleaned by gong farmers, men who worked at night shoveling human waste from the cesspits. It was a cycle of decay and temporary reprieve, repeated endlessly. In her final years, Elizabeth's body betrayed her completely. The lead had eaten away at her skin. The mercury had clouded her mind. Her teeth were gone. Her hair was gone. Her face, beneath the paint, was a ruin. But still, every morning the mask was applied. Still, the performance continued. She had spent her entire life transforming her body into a symbol, and she could not stop now. even as that body disintegrated. When she died in March of 1603, her ladies-in-waiting faced the task of preparing her for burial. They had to remove the makeup. Gently, with warm water and soft cloths, they wiped away the layers of ceruse, the decades of paint. What they found beneath was almost unrecognizable. Skin, gray and mottled, scarred by smallpox and poisoned by lead, stretched thin over bone. This was the woman the world had never seen. The woman Elizabeth herself had refused to see. Her hygiene habits were not the quirks of an eccentric monarch. They were the tools of a woman who understood that power is performance, that to rule is to control not just a nation, but the story people tell about you. She turned her body into a political weapon, and in doing so, she destroyed it. But she won. The image she created, the Virgin Queen, the eternal Gloriana, outlasted the flesh that bore it. Even now, 400 years later, when you picture Elizabeth I, you see the white face, the red hair, the jeweled gown. You see the icon, not the woman. You see exactly what she wanted you to see. That was her genius and her tragedy. She became immortal by erasing herself. In the end, they buried her in Westminster Abbey, her body sealed in lead, the same poison she had used to paint her face, now encasing her forever. The mask had become the coffin. And somewhere beneath the stone, beneath the monument, beneath the legend, lay the truth. A woman who had been so afraid of being seen as human that she chose to become something else entirely, even if it meant dying in the process. The performance never ended. It simply moved underground, where no one could ever wipe away the paint again.